For good or ill, the best way to run a meeting for centuries has been Robert's Rules of Order. These rules determine how actions take place when many people are trying to have a say. The rules can be complex. Kirk, our presenter here, has a huge book of them. And especially when you only use them once a month like you do in your ESD meetings. But the goal is a simple, smoothly run meeting. To help us understand Robert's rules and how to make them work for your ESD, we've asked registered parliamentarian Kirk Overby to join us. Kirk serves as the parliamentarian for several bodies, including, and let me get them here, the State Board of Education, which if you've ever been to an SBOE meeting, you know the parliamentarian's job is a big one. The Texas PTA, the Texas State Rifle Association, and an Austin Area Credit Union, among others. Kirk has been a presenter at safety conferences. You may have seen him before at our conferences. We love having him, and we're glad to have him tonight. So Kirk, without any further ado, let's get started.
Very good. And I am excited to be here. I've done a couple of the workshops at your conference, and I've had a lot of fun with that. And we're basically going to do that tonight. We're going to do our best to go through that. Don't be afraid to ask questions, though, because the question you have may be the question that most other people have, too. So go ahead and bring those in, and we'll do our best to work them in as we go through the presentation. And also, we have my slides are available on PDF. I believe they're on the website. Is that right, Clay?
They are there on your where you're watching the webcast right now. You can tune in. You can click the PDF link.
Very good. Very good. Okay. The first thing I want to talk about are about our resources. When we're talking about there's the old versions written in 1915, but there have been some modifications and additions since then. So you really do need to get what's called the newly revised edition. And I'm going to show you a copy of it here. It's a rather large book, a little bit intimidating, but I have a feeling there are a lot of other regulations that you're familiar with that you have to keep up with that I don't have to do in your emergency districts and things like that you have to worry about. So you're used to dealing with things like this. But this is basically the parliamentary rule book that's been developed in America over the last 150 years. And it covers what we call general parliamentary procedure. Okay? And then, of course, you have other things that may take precedence over this. The Texas Government Code, Open Meetings Act, for example, your Texas Health and Safety Code, your very own bylaws for your ESD, and any policies and procedures you have adopted. All those, as special as they are, take precedence over Roberts. So you would look at Roberts after you first went in to make sure that that you're following the Open Meetings Act and things like that. So Roberts is designed to cover everything that you don't already have specified either in law or in your own bylaws or rules. Okay? There is another book out there that I really recommend, and that is, it's written by the same authors, and I'm going to hold it up here so you can see. It's called Robert's Rules of Order in Brief. Okay? As you can see, it's a much less intimidating book. It costs a lot less. And if you get one of these, you can carry it anywhere to any type of a meeting that you go to. And it's designed to be a kind of an easy how-to reference. The great thing about this is it has references to the big book. So if you go in here and find something that you want to find more information about, it'll give you the actual page references. I like to think of it as the window into the big book. So getting a copy of this is very handy. You know, your chairman ought to have a copy, I think, and a great book to be able to work with, especially on the layman's level. One thing about this, though, it's like everything else. You know, you can read the rules of baseball, but that doesn't mean you can turn a double play. You're going to have to get out and practice. The great thing about Robert's Rules of Order is a little bit of practice will take you a long way. So you don't need to practice the way you would for a sport. It's much simpler than that. And we're going to do a little bit of that tonight as well. We're going to cover some of the principles and basics of parliamentary procedure. We're going to talk a lot about motions. How do we handle a motion? What do we mean by a motion? And that's one of the important tools in parliamentary procedure. If you do a lot of discussion and then at the very end you have a motion, you're really not using any of my tools, okay? And one of the important things is to get the motion out early. If you can get the motion out there in the very beginning, it's going to be hard to train your board to do this. But it's going to enable you to use all these wonderful tools that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk also, hopefully, if we get to that point, about putting together minutes and also consent agendas. I don't know if any of you work with that, but it's a great way to deal with a lot of the things that you adopt probably at every meeting and go through that. There isn't any really important discussion that needs to be taken up. And they're perfectly, public bodies have been using consent agendas for a long time. If any questions that you have along the way, please make sure that you bring that up. So let's go ahead and get into the principles. The most important thing is, and a lot of this is very common sense, we're only going to take up one matter of business at a time. And parliamentarians, we call that the main motion, okay? But there's this understanding that higher ranking motions can be pending. In other words, we have a main motion pending, let's say, to buy a new ambulance, it might be. And there might be a motion pending to postpone this to the next meeting. We're not ready really to deal with this right now. We'd like to take it up next month or whenever our next meeting is. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how those higher ranking motions can play in. And we understand that, hey, this is America, and that means what? The majority rules. But that doesn't mean that a slim majority, that if you have a board of 5, that 3 people can just tell the other 2, look, we're not going to hear from you at all. We don't want to hear your ideas. We're not going to let you debate. We're just going to get her done and move through the meeting. No, it doesn't mean that. It means in the end, having been patient with everyone else, the majority gets to make the decision. So along the way, we need to be concerned about the individual on your board. They have the right to free speech. They have the right to present ideas, in other words, motions. They have the right, certainly, to debate and discuss those motions, and most importantly of all, they have the right to vote. There's also an understanding that's been developed over some period of time, probably the last 150 years, that a sizable minority, and by that we mean a minority greater than 1/3, has the right to pretty much to present its case. So we have motions to suspend the rules require, for example, a 2/3 vote. Or to cut off debate, that motion requires a 2/3 vote. And that's really to give a large minority the opportunity to present their ideas. And then we even have protections for absentees. And under the Open Meetings Act, you may not think about this because you have to pretty much notify everybody, don't you, of what you're going to do. But even if you didn't have the Open Meetings Act, like in a private organization, everyone has the right to be notified. For example, on a board of directors, they have a right to be notified of the meeting, and in some cases they have the right to be notified what motions are going to come up. But most of that, of course, today is covered by the Open Meetings Act for you. And debate. There must be free and impartial debate. And what do we mean by that? Well, as long as you're staying on topic, you have the right to present whatever ideas you want to help influence the board in making its decision, okay? And Robert says it should be done in a reasonable amount of time, but that's not defined. Well, some things, 15 minutes might be perfectly reasonable. But what if you're going through a major overhaul in how you're doing things? 15 minutes isn't long enough. One meeting may not be long enough. You might bring in consultants. You might have some committees working on it. You might spend over a year making some decisions. So reasonable is not something that's clearly defined. More principles are the idea that there's equal justice to all members from others and from the chair. Everyone gets treated equally, even if you don't like that person and their ideas. The understanding is they're there, they're a member of the body, and they have just as much a right as anybody else. And it's very important to protect that right. And the chair's job is primarily to do that, to make sure that everybody is being treated fairly. There's an understanding of courtesy. And it's very important to maintain that level of courtesy. It's the body that's making the decision. It's not so much the individuals. We present ideas, but the body makes that decision. And so it's very important to be courteous, especially in a public body, because if the public sees board members treating each other with disrespect, that's going to have a reflection on the entire body. No matter what it is, your decisions. You might make perfectly great decisions, but if you misbehave, it's going to be kind of obvious that the board isn't doing well, or you'll be perceived as not doing well. Meetings are to be conducted efficiently, but how can that be? I've just told you you have to be courteous. That takes time. You have to be careful about treating everybody fairly. That takes time. We've got higher ranking motions. We've got debate. All those things take time, don't they? But despite that, there are some things we can do still to make meetings run efficiently. And we're going to go over those as well. And in the very end, believe it or not, you have the right to protect yourself from unruly and obnoxious members. You may have someone who's not a member of the board who attends a meeting. If they misbehave, I think it's pretty obvious how you can handle that. But even board members, if they get to the point where they just lose control and can't behave, you can actually ask that person to leave. Okay? It gets very delicate. You might want to talk to your attorney about it, but there are ways to even do that, only in those very grave situations. They rarely come up. Let's talk now about decorum. What I mean by that is how we approach our business and treat the business with respect. First off, one aspect of decorum is the actual business itself. We're actually trying to get something done, aren't we? And so we need to respect that. And we control our debate. We keep it on topic. This is the beautiful thing about getting the motion out first. Once you have that motion pending, if the motion is to adopt the budget, you can't talk about anything else. Within some level of reason, you've got to be able to move around that topic, but you can't get off topic. We call that germaneness of debate. And once you have a motion pending like that, then the chair is able to bring members in. Now wait a minute, remember we're not talking about how the Cowboys played the other day. We need to come back on topic here. We're talking about the budget. We don't talk about things that have already happened because that's not what's pending at this time. And certainly we wouldn't want to speak adversely against our own motion. And so the maker of the motion gets, we'll talk about this later too, they get to speak first, but they obviously shouldn't be speaking against their motion. That would be very dilatory, wouldn't it? And then we have to respect members. This has to do with the courtesy and the other things that I talked about on our principles. We don't attack members' motives. Everybody there on your board has a motive. They're there for a reason. There are things that they would like to try to get done. We avoid using members' names for that very reason. You've probably seen Congress, for example. They'll refer to the gentle lady from California. Well, they're allowed to say that, but they can't actually talk about the person, because as soon as you mention the person's name, it starts to get personal. And when it gets personal, then we bring in personal issues and personalities, and we get off topic. And then we're defending the person and their integrity and not actually talking about the issue. So it's always good, if possible, to do your best, even in a small board, just avoid using members' names. It takes a little bit of discipline to do it, but it works well. And even reading papers, you're not actually allowed to do that without permission. So if you decide in a board meeting, for example, well, I think we need to read the last page of the Declaration of Independence, I think it applies here. No, it doesn't. There's nothing about that that's pending. So if you want to read that, you have to get the permission of the body to do it. So even if I'm serving as a member and I want to maybe quote the bylaws, I'll say, Mr. Chair, may I have permission to quote Article 3? There's one line in here that I think pertains to that. I always make sure that I get permission to do that for that very reason. And then finally, we do need to respect the chair. If the chair is doing things fairly and doing their best to try to work through all these things that I've mentioned, respecting people's rights, etc., we need to help the chair do that. We're asking them really to multitask. And you know how that works, not very well for most of us. So we address all our remarks through the chair. We don't talk to the person next to us because now we're talking to that person and the chair has lost control of the meeting. We need to get recognized by the chair first. It takes a little bit of a step to do that, but it's important. And if the chair happens to interrupt you for some reason, the chair should have a good reason for that. There might be something that comes up that requires that. So be patient with the chair and allow them to do that if it happens. And certainly we want to refrain from disturbing the assembly. If your cell phone goes off, what did you do? Suddenly you've disturbed the assembly, haven't you? So we need to help the chair work through the difficult job of doing that. Let's go ahead now and talk about handling emotion, okay? And we're going to go in and we're going to define what a motion is, especially what I call a main motion, which is bringing the business before the body. So in handling a motion, in parliamentary procedure, motions, you see I have a little key there. Motions are the key. Without a motion, no discussion. That's going to be a tough one probably for you to bring into your board. And again, be patient with your board and try to work into it gradually. But if you can get that motion out beforehand, for example, I move that we adopt the budget as proposed, okay? Now you've got that motion pending and you can discuss it and you have the controls available to you. There are 8 steps, though, to do this, and I don't want you to be nervous about this. It's not that hard. The 8 steps are actually very easy. And once you learn how to do it, you can literally, with just a couple of times of practice, you can go through and actually conduct these 8 steps. But each one's very important. And there are 2 to obtain the floor. There's a little bit of a handshake that takes place to make sure that the chair has recognized you and given you the floor so you can speak. There are actually 3 to introduce a motion. We're pretty much used to the one that we make the motion and then somebody seconds it. But it's very important for the chair to then restate that motion to make it very clear, this is what's pending. And then we have 3 steps to consider the motion, and we're going to go through all those. So when I talk about motions, let me give you some examples. One example might be that the district, let's say that we're taking a political issue, that the district opposes the regulation of volunteer firefighters. Maybe earlier this year when the legislature was in session, there might have been some issues that you were concerned about, for example. Or it could be something that might come before another body, your commissioner's court, or maybe the city council. So one might be a resolution just to take a position that the district opposes the regulation of volunteer firefighters. Okay. Or another one might be that you want to propose a tax rate. And frankly, I have no idea what your tax rates would be, so I've made this up. It may be totally incorrect.
No, that's pretty good.
Is that not? That's not too bad.
Well, I mean, it varies, but
it depends on where you are.
3 cents per hundred. That's
okay.
we have some ESDs at that.
Okay. Okay. But you'll understand the gist of what I'm talking about. One might be that we propose a tax rate to be set at 0.0300 per $100 value. Okay. Or you might have you might actually be deciding on doing something that certainly is totally within your authority, like resolve that the new fire station be located at the corner, in this case, of County Road 416 and Main Street. Well, these would all be proposals to take action. These would be main motions, wouldn't they? And when I mentioned higher ranking motions, here's some examples of those, okay? And I call them secondary motions because they'd be applied when the main motion is pending. So we have a main motion pending that the district opposes the regulation of volunteer firefighters. That's our main motion. But because this is a year earlier on when we were actually concerned about the legislature and issues, we formed a little legislative issues committee. Really, we need to have that committee do what it was charged to do, which is look at political issues. So somebody might make a higher ranking motion and say, you know what, we need to refer that motion to the Legislative Issues Committee. And if that higher ranking motion were adopted, then this would go, I'm going to pretend Clay's my chairman, that these would go to the chairman of that committee, okay? And once the main motion would then be taken up by them, and they may come back with recommendations on it. They might combine it with other ideas and things like that to bring it back to the board. So that's what we mean by, for example, referring it to a committee. Or we have this motion to establish the tax rate at 0.0300 per $100 value. And someone might say, you know, it needs to be a little higher. So I move to amend by striking out 0.300 and inserting 0.320. Okay, so that would then be a motion to amend the main motion. Okay, again, a secondary motion. So we would have 2 motions pending. A motion that the tax rate be set at 0.300, and then a motion to change that specifically to strike out 0.300 and insert 0.320. So if this is adopted, we would then have the main motion as amended, and then we have to vote on that. Obviously, if this is rejected, then we would be back to the main motion as it was originally presented. So these are ideas on how we can use parliamentary procedure, for example, to help us work through and handle main motions. Or you just might have a situation where one of these motions is pending and someone says, I need a break. We've been at this for a long time. And I call this the most popular motion out there. It's the motion to recess. It never gets voted down, hardly, right? Best to do it by unanimous consent. So someone says, I got to stretch my legs, okay? Is there any problem with taking a 15-minute recess? There's actually a motion for that, a very high-ranking motion, as you can see why. And so if you did this, even while the main motion maybe to set the tax rate was pending, someone could move that we take a 15-minute recess, majority agrees to that, and then you would take an intermission for 15 minutes. Once that's done, you would come back and the meeting would be called to order and you would take up the business where it was. So usually recesses are just kind of done. The chair says, let's take a recess. But there's actually a motion for that, to do that kind of a thing. So that kind of lays out the basic idea of what a motion is. Now, the chair, remember I said the chair has a lot to do, so we've got to respect the chair, right? So here are the 8 steps. I've laid it out. So if you think of your high school band playing, and you've got the band leader, the band conductor is trying to keep everybody in line and in tune and on pace with what's going on. So in red, I have what the chair has to do. And you can see that if the chair doesn't do their job very well, the meeting's not going to work as well. Usually what happens is the chair misses one of these steps here. Usually it's going to be step number 5, or they don't do step number 7 correctly. Okay. But the first 2 there, remember I said the recognition, the member, I say here, rises and addresses the chair, but obviously in a 5-member board, you're not going to have to stand up, are you? You're going to simply say, Mr. Chairman, or you're going to raise your hand, and you're going to need to wait. It may just be a brief moment, but wait for the chair to recognize you, okay? And then here's the 3 steps, I'm sorry, to bring the motion forward. We move the motion, I move that, we do such and such. Any member can second the motion. And then the chair needs to state that motion again. But we just heard it. Yeah, but say it one more time. Make it clear what that motion is so that everybody understands that this is what we're going to consider right now. And after you've had some debate and things like that take place, state the motion again and again. So there's always clarity about what it is we're trying to make a decision on. Well, once we have the motion before us, then obviously we can debate the motion. And then the chair puts the question to a vote. Once we've finished debating or amending or whatever it is we want to do to it, we're going to vote on it, okay? And that vote, how that vote's taken, I want to make sure we talk about that. We'll come to a later slide. You need to be very careful in presiding about how you do that. And then finally, the chair should just say, this is what we did. We agreed that we're going to put the firehouse at a certain location, or whatever it might be. Just restate that again so the staff or whoever's taking the minutes can very clearly write that down and say, yeah, this is the decision that was made in the end. So how do we go about doing that, assigning the floor? Well, it's pretty simple. The member, is going to seek recognition, right, and say, I have here Mr. and Madam President, or it might be Mr. Chair, or whatever the title of the person is. It could be a committee chairman. It would apply the same way. And then if you're being audio or videotaped, I don't know if you actually do this. Sometimes a lot of public bodies do. You really need to say who you are. And we've had this problem, for example, in the State Board of Education. They do videotape their meetings. But a lot of times the people in the public who are watching or who are listening, they don't know who it is who's speaking. So it's probably very important, even if you have a small board, you have 5 members, everybody knows each other. Go ahead and announce who you are. It's a good practice to do that. And then you need to wait that moment, however long it might be, for the chair to recognize you. Sometimes the chair has something going on. They might be looking at the agenda, they might be trying to figure something out. They might need to ask a staffer a question, right? And try to figure something out. So there might be a pause there. You need to be patient with the chair when that happens. But once they recognize you, then you have what we call the floor, okay? And the chair would indicate that the member is recognized by their name usually, okay? Introducing a motion. The magic words, this is the abracadabra of parliamentary procedure. I move, okay? I move that we establish the tax rate at such and such. I move that we take a recess. I move that the next meeting be held at a particular time. That's the words that you need to bring forward to make it clear to the chair and everybody else that you're proposing that something be done, okay? Otherwise, you're probably just speaking in debate. I've heard people, for example, say, I think it's a really good idea that we take this up at the next meeting. All they did was speak in debate, didn't they? They didn't actually propose a motion. But if they say, I move that this be postponed to the next meeting, then if it's in order and someone seconds it, the chair is obligated to state that motion and then the body would vote on it. And if they agree, majority agrees, it would then move on the agenda for the next meeting. So it's very important for the chair to state the question on the motion. You see there I have on the slide, it is moved and seconded that. The formal thing to say after that, if you really want to be formal about your meetings, and I love this, is to say, are you ready for the question? What that means is, are you ready to vote? It doesn't mean you can't debate. It doesn't mean you can't make other motions. But the chair is going to prompt you for voting. So if you want to speak in debate, you need to get recognized. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to speak in favor or something like that. Because if you don't and you pause, the chair can then very simply say, all those in favor say aye and move on with the vote. So this is a very formal way to do it. Much better than saying, is there any further debate or is there any discussion? Because there the chair is really suggesting, hey, do you want to discuss it? So if you want to expedite your meetings, this is a perfectly fair and a good way, I think, to do it, is to say, are you ready for the question? First time you do it with your board, they're going to be confused. You might have to explain it to them. But after a while, they'll understand that what that means is the chair is going to go ahead and put it to a vote unless you step forward at that point and then speak in debate. Okay? So it's a great way and a perfectly acceptable way under parliamentary procedure to expedite business. Silence means no more debate, we want to vote. So let's go ahead and do a little practice. Now, Clay, we had talked about how we were going to do this. Remember that?
I will be whichever one you want me to be.
Well, I know, you'll be my guinea pig. So which one would you like to be? Would you like to be the chair?
I'll be the member.
You're okay. I'll go ahead and be the chair then.
Okay.
So you're going to try to get recognized.
And
right?
one of our folks out in the production booth will be our anyone.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Mr. Chair.
The member is recognized.
I move that we approve the 2015 budget as proposed by the treasurer.
Second. Somebody out there seconded.
They said it.
Oh, they did. Okay, good. And the chair would then say, it is moved and seconded that we approve the 2015 budget as proposed by the treasurer. Are you ready for the question? Okay. And you see what we did there? Those are the 5 steps I talked about to get the motion introduced. There were 2 in the very beginning where we did that little handshake so that I could clearly recognize Clay. He had the floor and could use it for any legitimate purpose. What did he do? He formally introduced a motion. It got seconded. We don't care who it was. Second's just a filter to make sure we have 2 people in favor of it. So don't get hung up on seconds being an important thing. And then the chair very clearly said, this is the motion before us. It is moved and seconded that we approve the 2015 budget as proposed by the treasurer. Okay? Are you ready for the question? Okay? 5 steps, very simple. You practice it 2 or 3 times, you'll get it down. And you won't actually have to script yourself. You'll be able to go through it very cleanly. So when we consider the motion, now we can debate it, can't we? And again, members have to obtain the floor to get recognized in debate. But the maker of the motion, they have the right to speak first. They don't have to speak first. They can get preferential recognition later if they want to. But sometimes the chair will do that. They would look, I would look towards Clay and see if he wanted to get recognized in debate. And if he didn't, then I would look to see if anybody else did. Okay? Clay, if he wants to speak in favor of his motion, he needs to direct what he says through me. He doesn't have to look at me, but he needs to be getting recognition through me, not through anybody else. Okay? And then debate must be confined to the merits of the question. We have to talk about the budget and items in the budget. We can't get off topic. Okay? And then debate can be closed if no one else wants to speak in debate. The chair, if somebody does, the chair has the obligation to call on them. But otherwise, it's going to take what? Remember, if we take away the rights of people to free speech, we're going to require a higher vote for that. And remember, I mentioned that minority of a third can keep things going. It's going to take a 2/3 vote to be able to do that. So if you have a 5-member board, what's that? That's going to be 4-1. 3-2 is not going to be enough to be able to do that. But here's what Robert says the debate rules are, and you might be shocked to see this. The length of speeches, well, each person can speak for up to 10 minutes at a time. Not many people can do that. Very rarely have I seen a speech actually last for 10 minutes. And guess what? Most of the time that happened, yeah, it was an attorney that did it. And boy, you talk about having a little bit of joy cutting off an attorney. I enjoyed that a lot. But I did have that happen one time where an attorney actually talked for over 10 minutes, and I said, I'm sorry. And he was very shocked, too, to find out he couldn't keep going. But 10 minutes is a long time. And it's going to be rare that you'll get up to that level in your board meetings. And then the number of speeches is limited to twice. Now, that was actually borrowed from the United States Senate. In the United States House, you only get to speak once. They don't want to hear from 435 people twice, as you can imagine. But in the Senate, they allow someone to speak a second time. Now, Clay, why do you think that is? I'm going to put the question to you since I can't ask everybody else.
Why?
Why do you think there would be an opportunity for someone to speak a second time in debate?
To rebut anything
exactly
that
correct.
come up in the time that they
That's
since
exactly
they spoke
right.
first.
Yeah. And so because of that, we're going to let everybody speak a first time, you see. And it's only fair that everyone be allowed to speak a first time before we allow Clay to speak a second time. We don't want to let Clay rebut every single person who speaks against his motion. He may want to do that, but he can't speak a second time in debate until everyone has spoken a first time in debate. Hey, it's only fair. And then after that, he could speak a second time, but beyond that, he's actually going to have to move to be allowed to speak a third time, which would require a 2/3 vote to do that. So a great way to control debate, if you have that person who tries to counter-debate every single person who speaks, this is only a matter of fairness. I'm sorry, sir, you can't speak a second time until everyone has spoken a first time. It's nice to try to also switch between pros and cons. In a small board, that's kind of hard to do. That's really more for larger bodies. But if the chair can do that, try to ask if everyone's speaking in favor, ask if anyone's against. And sometimes if no one's against, that might tell everyone, I think we can vote now. There's no one else who wants to speak in opposition. We know we have the votes. Let's move on. Okay? So let's practice this a little bit. Now, Clay, we haven't practiced this one. So now this time, I tell you what, I'm going to make you be the chair.
Okay.
A forced volunteer. So now, if you'll just start there. Okay.
The question is on the motion that we approve the contract with the city. Are you ready for the question?
Mr. Chair.
The secretary is recognized.
I rise to speak in favor of the motion. We have worked on this for some time, and we've had our attorneys and the city attorneys have looked at it, and we've gotten a lot of feedback from the community and from the local police department in the city. Everybody seems to be in favor of this arrangement, and so I think we're ready to vote on it, and we need to go ahead and approve this contract. So I urge the other members of the board to vote in favor. And then I've done what? I've relinquished the floor. I'm finished. It didn't take me 10 minutes, did it? It only took a few minutes to say that. And then if another person wanted recognition, they would seek recognition. So as the presiding officer, Clay would look up and see if anybody else wanted to speak. If no one did, then he would say, are you ready for the question? Remind them of the motion and then go ahead and take the vote. That would be how it would work. Okay? So again, very simple, but there's that little handshake that needs to take place in getting recognized. Let's go over some voting terms because there's sometimes some confusion. In a small group, it's not hard to figure out what the vote is, right? But a word that is often misused is the word majority. It actually means more than half. There's not some clever mathematical formula for what a majority is. Majority simply means more than half. So if 5 people vote, more than half is 3. But more than half is also 4 or 5, isn't it? So a vote of 3 to 2 would be more than half. If someone abstains, a vote of 3 to 1 would certainly be more than half of those present and voting, wouldn't it? So don't worry about things like 51% or 1/2 plus 1. In certain cases, it can actually get you into trouble. You'll do much better if you just remember majority means more than half. So a majority vote means what? More than half of those present and voting. Okay? Now, unless you have a provision in your bylaws or something that says a majority of those present, it's understood that a majority vote means more than half of those present and voting. There have been a lot of court cases about this. So what I'm saying is tried and true. Say we have a 7-member board, and All 7 members are there, but 4 people abstain. The vote is 3-2. 2 in favor, 1 opposed. We don't look at the blanks or the abstention. In this case, it would be abstentions, right? Because they are not a vote. How many were present and voting? There were 3 present and voting. Is 2 more than half of those present and voting? Yes. 2 is much more than half of 3, isn't it? So that vote would be carried. That would be a perfectly legitimate vote to do that. It makes people nervous when you have that many abstentions. But that's what majority vote means. We don't count abstentions. Roberts actually says abstentions are meaningless. That's a hard thing for people to understand. 2/3 vote means if we do that, then what? 2/3 of those present and voting. Okay? And the easy way to tell that is you take the negative and you multiply by 2, and that's how many you need in the affirmative. So that's an easy way to go through that. But usually in your smaller boards, it's not a problem. Another great way to do things is unanimous consent. You know, Henry Robert he actually was in the Army Corps of Engineers. And if you ever go down to the Galveston seawall, there's a plaque there, actually a kind of a pedestal that has his name on it, because after the big hurricane that destroyed that city, they raised up the city and built the seawall, and he was one of the engineers who did that. So he actually has a connection with Texas. But you know what he did? What he presided over organizations in the 1880s and 90s. He would use unanimous consent all the time. There's this big, thick book, but if everyone wants to go ahead and do it, why go through the procedure? It's a wonderful way to expedite business. And if somebody wants to go the slower way or do something different, what do? They say, well, I object, or I would like to do something else, okay? You could pretty much use it for any vote. If there's no objection, we'll take a 15-minute recess. If there's no objection, we'll postpone this to the next meeting, okay? So if there's silence, that means what? Everybody's willing to go along and do this. So what do you think are the most likely things that you're going to use this for? How about the things that you do at every single meeting? Do you approve the minutes of the previous meeting? Is it controversial? Isn't this something that everybody wants to do? Do you need to have a formal mover, a seconder, and to formally take a vote? All in favor say aye, all opposed say no. Very rarely do you need to do that. The chair can simply say that the minutes have been provided. Everyone hopefully has had a chance to see the minutes. Is there any objection to approving the minutes as submitted? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. And you go on from there. What about adjourning? You've covered your agenda. There's nothing left on the agenda. Do you actually need a formal motion? I move to adjourn, a second, and then a vote? The chair can simply say, everything that's been posted, that we've posted for under the Open Meetings Act, we've taken up all the items on the agenda. Is there anything else, announcement that needs to be made, or anything else that we can bring up under the Open Meetings Act, maybe to present to the body without a vote? Hearing nothing like that, do we need to actually vote to adjourn? It's obvious. We don't want to sit there quietly and stare at each other for the next half hour, do we? The chair can simply say, there being no further business to come before this meeting, pause, the meeting is adjourned. Great way to use unanimous consent. And anything else, if you have a routine motion that always comes up before the body, that's a great thing to either put into a consent agenda, or that the chair can simply use unanimous consent. And any member at any point in time can very simply step up and say, I object, I want to discuss this, or I have some questions of staff I need to ask, whatever that might be. So another way to expedite business. I mentioned majority of those present. I don't know if that shows up in any of your bylaws. If you put it in your bylaws, then abstentions now actually have the effect of a no vote. It's not quite the same, but because it takes away from the yeses. Because if you have, again, 5 members present, a majority of those present means you need 3 solid votes. So if 2 people abstain and 1 person votes no, you're not going to get a majority of those present, and the abstentions can actually affect what you do. It's recommended if you can. I recommend if you can get away from that and just do a majority vote, you're going to be much better off. What about a roll call vote? You may do this from time to time. What that actually means is you must publicly announce your vote, and that vote gets recorded in the minutes, how each person voted. If they pass or abstain, that gets recorded in the minutes. If they vote yes or no, that gets recorded in the minutes, exactly how they voted, okay? So roll call is a very open and very formal vote. And when does the chair vote, by the way? The chair votes last, because the chair needs to be objective and not participate in the. I had one board where the chair would actually taking a vote by hands. She would say, "All in favor, raise your hand." And what's the chair doing? The chair is actually, she didn't intend to do it, but she's actually trying to encourage people to vote yes, and the chair really shouldn't do that. The chair should always vote when the chairs can affect the result. It might be to break a tie, although the chair doesn't have to do that. The chair doesn't have to vote to break a tie. Chair can leave it as a tie, and what happens if you have a tie? Do you have a majority in favor? No. That vote would lose, okay? So the chair could simply leave a close vote. If you have 5 members, 2 vote yes, 2 vote no, the chair can leave it alone, okay? In a roll call, you need to call on the chair last. And the chair only needs to vote if it's something that's going to affect the result. So now we move on, and the chair puts the question to a vote. We use this term put the question, but that means to a vote. So the chair, again, making sure that everybody is ready to vote, would then state the motion one more time, and then the chair would say, all those in favor of the motion say aye. Those opposed say no. And I got to tell you, it's very important to say that last part. Don't say things like, those opposed, same sign. Because frankly, I got to tell you, I have no idea what that means. Don't disenfranchise the no votes, okay? Make it very clear. If you're going to prompt those in favor to say aye, do the same thing with those opposed. Those opposed say no. Or if you know it's going to be a closer vote, all those in favor, raise your hands. Thank you. All those opposed, raise your hands. Make it very clear so that there'll be no question about how the vote was taken. And then the chair needs to announce the result. And the examples I have on the slide would be, the ayes have it, the motion is adopted, and a new ambulance will be purchased. Okay? The next item of business is the approval of the budget, or whatever it might be. Or the noes have it, the motion is lost. The next item of business is, and then move on like that. Immediately step forward. Make it very clear what the actual action was. Because there can be cases, you know, in meetings, and this happens all the time, where later on they're scratching their heads and trying to say, what did we actually do in the meeting? You should never have that happen. Why would it happen? Probably because the chair didn't make it clear. All they have to do is restate the motion, take the vote carefully, announce the result, and it will always be clear what the result was. And you'll never have that problem. So I'm taking a vote here now. We're going to get back. I like picking on Clay. Clay's going to be able to chair any meeting in the state of Texas when I get through with them tonight. So, Clay, what we're going to do is notice here. See, I've really set you up. Well, you're set up because look what the slides. You see anybody else responding? It's all you.
Okay. Okay.
You see how important it is for the chair to do the vote?
I got you.
Okay.
Okay.
So you're going to go ahead and do it, and the rest of us will try to vote, and we'll see how it comes out. Okay.
Okay. Are you ready for the question? The question is on the motion that we approve the contract with the city. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no.
Just read it.
The ayes have it, and the contract is adopted. The next item of business is...
Right. And another thing you can tell, and this happens too, you probably won't have teleconferences because under the Open Meetings Act, there's a lot of restrictions on being able to do that if you can at all. But you actually cannot take a voice vote if you're in a teleconference because there's no way for you to hear all the people who have said yes and no. Just a little tidbit that won't apply to your open meetings. But you see it very clearly there, and it'll be on that slide when you go through on your PDF file. Remember, that is available to you if you go to the website. That's the clear way to go through and take a vote. It takes a little bit of time, not a lot. Just these little minor details really add a lot of clarity to what you're doing. So let's get a little humor in here. And this is from the cartoon strip BC. So if we can get that cartoon on so people can see it. The title of this cartoon is Motion Sickness. It's a common disorder brought on by parliamentary procedure. And boy, don't we feel it now, right? So obviously, Johnny Hart had been to a meeting or two and understood what was involved in this. Okay, so types of motions. Well, I wish I had a chart. Usually when I do this at your conference, I hand out a chart for everybody so they can see this. And we don't have that available to you at this point, but there is a slide in there a little bit later that you'll be able to reference. But again, I mentioned the main motion. This is the way we get business done. This is the thing we need to do most of all, is get those out there. And it introduces a new topic. And then we have what we call subsidiary motions. These are motions that help us develop the topic. The ones you're most likely to use are going to be what? Amend. And that means that we need to change the wording. We need to make it a little bit better than what it is. Commit. We might have a committee we need to refer this to so they can study it. Or we just need to postpone it to the next meeting. These are very common ones. One that's very much misused, and that is the motion to lay on the table. And you can see there I have it kind of it's almost grayed out. Lay on the table is greatly misused. We use it a lot because we see it used in the legislature. And it means, in the legislature, it actually means to kill the motion. And they have special rules for killing things. There's a lot of death and destruction that takes place in the legislature. And the reason they do it is because they have 6,000 bills filed that they have to work through. So only the survival of the fittest works in the legislature. And they work differently because of that, and need to. But in your organization, you're not going to have 3 readings for a bill. You're not going to have something taken up by a House and a Senate and then approved between the two and the governor. You can do things much simpler. And because of that, you have to be careful about tabling. Usually when you want to table something, you usually mean, I want to postpone this to the next meeting, okay? Or postpone it until later in the agenda, okay? So be careful about using that motion. Usually if you say table, it means something else. Privileged motions that come up very often, these are motions that we just need to be able to do no matter what. A motion to recess, like we talked about that already. Or actually, believe it or not, if you have meetings that take place more often than every 3 months on a quarterly basis, a majority can adjourn without debate whenever it wants to, even with business pending. Now, a lot of people don't know that, but if the meetings lasted too long, you've gone on for 3 hours, it's way too late. There's no reason we can't adjourn right now and take all this up at the next meeting. So if someone could actually move to adjourn, it's a higher ranking motion, it's not debatable, and if a majority says yes, then your agenda and that motion that's pending would get taken up at the next meeting under, yeah, you guessed it, unfinished business, okay? So there's a way to handle that if a meeting gets too long. Then there's other things that we call them incidental motions because they can come up at any time. They're incidental to the situation. Remember I said the chair has a difficult job to try to balance all this, and chairs make mistakes. Even when I preside, I can make a mistake. And so someone can simply say, point of order, and that means we've made a boo-boo, we need to correct it now. Okay? It doesn't mean I need preference and recognition for debate, or I want to interrupt the person speaking. You can only do that if you actually have, there's been an error in following the rules somehow. Another one is division of the assembly, and sometimes something will just say, I call a division, you know, or they can shout out division. And what that means is the voice vote was not clear. We need to take this with usually a show of hands. And any one person has the right to demand that, okay? So if somebody yells division, the chair simply needs to retake the vote with usually a show of hands in the case of your boards. Another thing that's very common is a request for information, and you get that a lot because you have board members who are asking questions of staff. Am I right about that? A lot of that goes on. And that's the duty of the board. It wastes a lot of time, doesn't it? Well, maybe not, because the board has a responsibility. Each board member has a responsibility to make sure that things are being taken care of. And so we have to be patient when that type of thing takes place. But the actual motion for that is a request for information. Then we have some other motions we call bring again motions, and I'm not actually going to talk about those tonight. Okay, we're going to skip that. So I'm going to go over, here's these ranking motions that I want to tell you about, and the way this works, we can just cover it real quickly. Let's say we have a main motion pending. It's a motion to buy that new ambulance, okay? And then somebody says, we've had enough debate. So the motion for that, for cutting off debate, is the previous question. So, oops, I don't have that right. There we go. So the previous question is a higher ranking motion, okay? And if that motion's pending, you cannot make a lower ranking motion while this motion's pending. So if somebody then says, well, what we really need to do is postpone this to the next meeting. Well, if you'll go back to my motion chart, and I'll show that here, that motion is not in order, okay? The motion for to postpone to a certain time. Because why? You see there, I have pending the previous question. Postpone is lower ranking. So the chair would say, I'm sorry, that motion is not in order at this time, okay? Because you can't make a lower ranking motion. You can only make a higher ranking motion. But that means that even with the previous question pending, a main motion to buy an ambulance, and then someone says, I move to cut off debate, I move the previous question, someone could then still move to take a recess. There are still some higher ranking motions that are pending. So that just gives you an idea about how the ranking motions work. Don't stress over it. If you have that list of the ranking motions, you'll know what to do when the time comes. And it's very, very rare in a meeting you'll have more than one or two of these happen. And if they do happen, what should you do? Go slow. Because if you're confused at the chair, guess what? The other members are going to be confused too. So just slow it down and make sure that you're careful about taking those higher ranking motions when you do that. Another important thing is to have motions written down. And it's really good before a meeting starts to have as many motions written down as possible. Sometimes what I will do is if I know that for example, we've given notification under the Open Meetings Act that we're going to take up maybe 5 items. And we have a formal way that we want to state each motion. I would just get that written down. A staffer could do it, or the chair could do it. And just make sure that a member has that before the meeting starts, okay? So that they can then literally read that motion out loud. Or they can do it themselves. And any lengthy motion, if your staff is in charge of taking the notes of the meeting and putting the minutes together, if the staffer is going like, wait a minute, I don't have that motion very clear, the chair can demand that it be made in writing. We don't do this to punish the members. This isn't, oh, you made a long motion, I'm going to punish you, now you have to write it down. I want you to think about this. Who does it help most of all if you get a motion in writing? Well, I really think it helps the maker of the motion. Think about this. When you write a motion down, you think it through carefully. And every time I see someone write a motion down, you know what they do? They go in and correct their grammar first thing. You can see where they've scratched through words and made their own editing marks. So you get a better motion, don't you? And then you hand that motion to the chair, and the chair is going to do what? They're going to accurately read whose motion? The maker's motion. Any changes get tracked well, and then finally it provides a record for the minutes. And I have literally seen staffers reach over underneath the chair and grab that piece of paper from the person because they want to have that motion carefully recorded for the minutes. So if you write your motion down and you're the maker of the motion, it's actually going to help you more than anyone. So if they're struggling writing something down, you can remind them that. And Clay, how much time do we have?
We got about 5 minutes. We got a few questions that I want to get to.
Let's go ahead and jump to that because I had some other things that I wanted to cover, and I don't think we have enough time to do that. So.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for that presentation. We're going to hopefully see you at the conference with all this stuff.
I would love to come again.
That's
yeah,
awesome. So. I usually at this point I would go ahead and give you our slide and say get your questions in, but we've got a queue full already, so we're going to try to hit some of these. And go ahead and still have you out here in an hour. Okay, first one was actually called into us. I've got to kind of distill this a little bit. You mentioned bylaws a couple times in your examples and whatnot. ESDs, you all out there don't really have bylaws per se. Your bylaws are essentially the Health and Safety Code 775 and the Open Meetings Act. That's what governs your organization. But would you say beneficial, should they have board meeting procedures that govern how to run a meeting? Would you think that's something that an ESD should, if you don't have, they should get?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it might, sometimes you'll want to have some standing rules that relate to outside members who are attending. And it's always nice to have those clearly written down, because you don't want to make decisions on telling a member of your community that they can't talk on the fly. So if you have some procedures that are set down ahead of time as to when are you going to allow public discussion to take place, and what the different ways to do it, of course. In small meetings where you only have a few people, that can be some very simple procedures. In larger meetings, you might actually need to have public hearings and things like that. So it's always good to have something like that that you can gradually and slowly develop. But even for the board itself, if you want to have some procedures on how to propose ideas for the agenda, how are you going to make decisions on the agenda and things like that, very good to have those ideas laid out, so that, again, you're not making decisions on the fly. And you don't want to spend time at the meeting discussing and arguing how to do procedure. You really would rather spend your time doing what? Making decisions, right, that are important. So good idea to have those kind of things in place. And I didn't know that. I didn't know you didn't have bylaws.
They don't really have producer, correct me on that. You don't really have, as a governmental entity, you don't have bylaws per se, because the law, the Open Meetings Act and Health and Safety Code 775 are your governing sort of documents.
Right.
But as you said, if you're having a town hall meeting and you're going to have a lot of public debate and a lot of stuff like that, you definitely want to have some of these procedures ahead of time that you're not making up on the fly. Yeah.
Well, and let me just give you an example. The State Board of Education, and you won't be in they have 200 people attend every meeting, so you're probably not going to be in that situation. But they have 8 or 9, 10 pages of just operating procedures. I'm not suggesting you need that. I mean, much better to keep it simple if you can, right? Simple is always better. But it's a good idea to start thinking about, if you don't have anything, maybe talk to some other ESD boards and see what they might do and get some ideas on some procedures. It's a great idea. Yeah.
You were gonna, I think, talk about minutes a little bit.
Yes.
There's a question here from Houston, I believe. In the minutes, do the names of who seconded it have to be recorded? So,
absolutely not. No one on the face of the earth cares who seconded the motion to adjourn last year in the January meeting or whatever. You get what I'm saying? It's totally irrelevant. In fact, even legislative bodies, they don't require seconds at all. They've completely gotten rid of them. We keep them in what we call ordinary parliamentary procedure, non-legislative, because you can get into situations with large conventions where you don't want to have just one person proposing an idea. Okay? It's just a filter. So get over the need for writing down the name of the seconder and things like that. Okay? And get this, even if you didn't ask for a second and you've adopted the motion, did you violate procedure? No. Remember, it's just a filter to make sure more than one person wants to consider it. So if you have a 4-to-1 vote and you adopt something, obviously the need for the second is no longer there. 4 people wanted to consider it. And even the 5th person who voted against it considered it, didn't they? So get over seconds, don't worry about it. And even in a board of 5 members, why wouldn't you want each person to be able to present an idea? There's nothing at all wrong with even getting rid of seconds in a 5-member board. I wouldn't do it if you had a 15-member board, though.
Can the chair make the motion or second a motion?
Yes. However, usually the chair in a formal proceedings wants to pull out of the position of taking a position. Committees are a little different. Usually the chair is literally feeding the committee members. The chair knows more about what's going on and is bringing ideas to the committee. But committees don't actually make decisions, do they? They just make proposals. So it's usually best for the chair to step away and not do that kind of a thing. But a chair can certainly do that. The chair has the same rights as the other members. When the chair does that, though, and they've taken a position, they're no longer objective in presiding. And that's where you get into a problem with that. Because now the chair has made it very clear what their position is, and they can be accused literally of, well, the chair was trying to push this through and went beyond the limits of what a presiding officer should do. For example, the Speaker of the Texas House would never or would never propose a motion or do something like that, okay? And again, would only vote in the case of a tie or if their vote would make the difference. So it's best if you're the chair to get out of that. If a motion needs to be made, just do it by unanimous consent. Is there any objection? That's a great example for the chair to bring a motion forward, is just to use unanimous consent. So,
Okay, last
Okay.
question.
okay.
We're running a little bit long here, but that's fine. If an issue is tabled, how does someone get it back in discussion? If a vote is needed, is it a simple majority or 2/3?
Okay. So if you actually have laid something on the table, the motion is to take from the table. It takes a majority vote to do that. Okay. If what you've actually done is tabled it to the next meeting, that was really what the motion to postpone to the next meeting. Okay. Once you've postponed something, it pretty much needs to be done, except you still at that meeting you're at, you can make a motion to reconsider that. That gets kind of advanced and stuff like that. Yeah. But I would avoid using the word table. You probably need to use a different word if you're having to table something. What table actually means in Robert's Rules of Order is we have a matter of urgency that needs to take place right now. An example might be the mayor of your local town comes in and would like to talk to you about something else. The chair could say, is there any objection to laying the matter on the table so we can hear from the mayor? That's how you would really properly use the motion to table. My guess is if you're tabling, you're probably not using it right, and you really mean postpone to the next meeting. So,
Right.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Kirk, for being here. I want to get in a quick plug for you since you were so nice to
thank
do
you.
this.
Yeah.
Kirk is a professional registered parliamentarian, serves on a number of parliamentarian for a number of boards.
Yes.
He's available for consult, I guess, for ESDs. He's even a professional presider in occasion if you have a really contentious board and a contentious issue. So feel free. Is your information on the slide, or
I believe it is, but you can also contact the Texas State Association of Parliamentarians. And one problem is I'm in Austin. You may not want to ship me all the way up to the suburbs of Dallas, for example. I know all the parliamentarians in Texas, and I will gladly put you in touch with somebody else who might be able to come and help you. So the object is to help you run your meetings and run them well. And I'd be more than happy. Clay can contact me, for example, and I can make recommendations for you. So we want you to have good meetings. That's the most important thing.
a man who definitely knows his stuff. Thank you again for being here tonight.